that's a terrible thing, man. That's the world we live in now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then what did y'all see what happened with the Kansas City Chiefs parade?
Oh, yeah.
That was crazy too.
But see, that one's a little different. I would classify them as two different ones.
Well, yeah.
Once you start getting into details. The thing is, we throw them all in together. And
Yeah.
so the one with her, that's definitely like a mental illness.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Things like that. Like there's
The other one was a dispute.
The other one was they were in the hood probably, and there was a dispute, and someone just took the dispute too far.
That's why I told Fidelia, they lowered what's considered a mass shooting. Before, a mass shooting was if you shot anybody from 10 on up, and now if you shoot 3 or 4, it's a mass shooting.
I mean, they're both tragedies, no matter what. But
they are. But now
thing,
all that can be gang fights. They can be brawls in the bar, things like that. Now they call it a mass shooting.
Yeah.
But I think that's the thing when you get into.
But the one in Kansas City, I think it was a dispute between some guys, probably gang members or.
But it may, and I don't know, maybe it's come out already. I don't watch the news as much, and I don't keep up with it.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm interested to know, because it was interesting, and again, I don't know if any of this makes it into the thing, but the last, and don't get me wrong, I mean, you see the mass shootings everywhere. They've all been different people, but the last like 5 or 6 have all been people who were of. I was watching someone talk about this. The last 5 or 6 have been people who were either transgender or something of that sort. Like the one that was what was it? The last few I think had to do all.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, if you read about it, I was reading someone talking. I was listening to someone talk about it, and I'm trying to remember the last few that happened. But they were talking about how the last few were. Because there was another one that was in a school. I think it was a private school, wasn't it?
Are you talking about when went in there and
there was I think it was a woman who was a man.
Oh no, yeah.
They went in there and they shot.
It was was it an elementary school? No, it was a. I think I remember.
It was like some kind of private school.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like a Christian private school that went and got shot up. I think one of the club ones was also something like that. The last few have been, and the thing is, the person that was I'm trying to remember who.
Yeah, I think that one from the club was it was for transgender and all that.
I'm trying to remember, and the reason they were bringing it up, it wasn't to say like, oh, this is because I mean, if you go previously to those 5, it was definitely people who weren't transgender. You had, but those previous ones, we always talk about it being a mental illness and things like that. With these, they haven't talked about it so much because people don't want to tie transgender to mental illness. Years ago, we tied transgender to mental illness, but nowadays we don't want to tie it to that because of the political correctness of it's not a mental illness, it's just the way someone thinks. And so you kind of go and again, I mean, controversial topics, no matter which way you go, no matter what you say or what, it's going to be offensive to somebody. Definitely. But it's just kind of the whole thing of, I don't know if there's ever a simple solution to this. I mean, there's so many root causes to what happens to people, right? Whether it's to go shoot something or want to change your identity or whatever the case may be, you always have to go to a root cause of it. And typically at the very root of it is I think what we see throughout time is sin. And not going and directly saying, okay, get into the debate, I'm not trying to get into a debate of transgender is sin or what. Yeah. It's more of all the things that we deal with, if you go down to the basis of it, is rooted in some kind of sin, whether it's our lust, our addiction, our things of that sort. They kind of drive to that. And I think sometimes we don't know how to deal with it or talk through it.
Yeah, no. There could be some facts in that, man.
Could be some facts in that. Could be some falseness in that.
Could be some facts in that. Never know. Never know.
I feel like that was a polite way of saying, I don't know if all that is right.
Yeah. I'm just saying, could be some facts in it.
I'm not sure what that comment means. Like, could be some facts in there. Most likely not.
Not.
I don't know where. I don't know.
Nah.
No, I think when you look at the world today, we try to boil. I think we're always trying to deal with the
Stupid people.
No, that's not the case. I think that's when you start writing off people. Actually,
The stupid actions of people.
No. I think it's easier for us to look at the outside and try to deal with the fruits of sin than actually dealing with the root of sin.
Okay.
And so I think sometimes we run into that, and so then the debates and things happen, and we get lost in different things. I mean, when you try to deal with the fruits of sin, you're always going to have someone saying this is right or this is wrong, this is this is that, and in our world, I mean, in the Christian world or in what God created, not even the Christian world, in what God created, there's a morality law, right, that we all live by instinctively.
Right.
Yeah.
But when you start going back to the root of it, of what would drive us away from that natural moral law, that's what we should truly be looking at, not what is the fruit of that took us away. So we get so caught up in like smoking, drugs, drinking, alcohol, premarital sex, all these other things. We get stuck in all these other things, but we don't ever go down to the root of what's actually causing that.
It. Yeah.
And so we try to treat the outside, never really treating the inside. And that's only putting a mask over things.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. Now, there are some facts in that.
Thank you.
Lots of facts. As a matter of fact, it's all fact. How about that?
But I think, but with it all, I mean, I think we should keep people in prayer, like the thing that went on at not just at the churches, but in other places. I mean, where the shootings are happening again. You'll get people like with the parade thing, right? That to me, that was an unfortunate incident. You wish it didn't happen. It's what happens when you let people people probably were intoxicated and angry and, emotions flared and pride came up. And I mean,
definitely, for sure.
You had a mixture of things. And you'll have some people that will go real quickly and say, well, see, they shouldn't have been partying. That was a sin. They shouldn't have been doing this and that.
Yeah.
The most major things like that, they have metal detectors and all that, for people to walk,
Yeah, but I don't think they had that at the parade.
This is at the parade.
And I don't even think at the church they had it.
Because, but it was almost at the end of the parade when they were talking when that happened.
Yeah, but I don't think they had metal detectors at the parade.
Well, a lot of them have it, like Boston, what happened in Boston, the bombing, and then what happened like in New York City and the New Year's Eve and all that, and because they were able to take what were they, AK-47, what they were shooting, those kids, those teenagers in Kansas City.
Well, I don't know what they were shooting.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, they were AK something because.
I don't know what they were shooting.
And it was weird because it was one of them that was running with it. Some bystanders tackled him. They ran after him. Boom, tackled him. They showed the gun, where it was. But
might have been an AR.
Yeah, an AR.
Yeah,
and a lot of them are, but it's the publicity too of the media, that's to blame for a lot of these things, Like you hear like that kid that took all that thing from his ankle bracelet from here in San Antonio and put it on TikTok and told Sheriff Salazar, okay, now come and get me. I'm going to shoot people and this and that.
Oh,
and
wow.
put it on TikTok, So, and then when they come out in the news, they come out cocky, because too, the laws are very lenient. Like one teenager came out.
How did that change from years before? It hasn't changed from years before.
Years before, there wasn't that much publicity, and you did, wasn't as much.
Bonnie and Clyde were some of the most cockiest people.
Oh,
They
yeah.
used the source of media that they had at that time. So.
Yeah, but that was Bonnie and Clyde.
Don't get
That
me
was,
wrong, there's more. Yeah, but
but
before they were Bonnie
yeah.
and Clyde, they were just a kid
But,
that could have been on TikTok.
because before you would do a lot of
yeah,
things
you think about that,
before you would do a lot of things as teenagers. In my time, you didn't come out on the news or anything. They didn't want it to come out.
Yeah, but you were,
know.
but you were looking also for the street credit.
Yeah.
They're not looking for it to come out on the news. They're looking for a street credit. It's just their street credit comes from TikTok.
And all
You
that
didn't want
crap.
the police knowing what you
Yeah.
did, but you wanted everyone in the neighborhood knowing what you did.
Yeah.
I didn't want nobody to know who I was.
That's
That keep me in. Yeah. I mean, with the gangs and all that, yeah, but not
Well, that's what
not
that
with
was.
everybody else.
but there's not really gangs. I mean, there's gangs. Don't get me wrong, but it's more about the publicity.
Yeah.
I just think it's more. And I think
There are gangs here, but they're not as formed as in California and all that.
But I don't think it's. I mean, you're not really looking at the gangs.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I think to your point, a lot of these kids are wanting publicity, but they're wanting to create an image for themselves, and so that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, right, wrong, or indifferent, they're trying to. I don't know if it's all the media. I think a lot of times it's just. It's hard to pinpoint, but I think one of the things you look at is I mean, I don't know. It's hard to get into one corner or one section of everything because what we're talking about right now is violence. You're talking about mere violence, right? Because then people get the problem sometimes is we go too general and then we don't focus on the actual thing because you go too general, then people say, well, what's right? You shouldn't kill. And then you get into the whole debate about war and stuff that's going on. But when you're looking at this is pointless violence. Like, if you could find a logical reason to it, then you could have an understanding, right?
Right.
Like, don't get me wrong, violence is wrong no matter what. But, like, if you went back and you saw, like, the old cowboy western movies, there was violence because people were fighting over the land and the cattle and stuff like that. Now, whether you agree whose land or whose cattle it is, that's up for debate. But there was a battle there. When you start looking at the violence now, it's more because people don't know how to allow, I don't know, whether it's their outward expression or they have no other thing, but something drove them, like the shootings that, again, they're two very different shootings when you look at the parade and when you look at what happened.
Happened at that church.
At the church, because at the church, that to me was something that had been building up. Now, what had caused that person to do that? I don't know. I don't know if was the person targeting someone at the church? Did something?
They kicked her out or something.
What built to that level? Because you don't wake up one morning and say, I'm going to go shoot a church.
Go shoot up a church, right?
You've been building up to that moment.
And then target that church,
versus you have this random act of violence.
Yeah.
Between you don't know. I mean, I don't know. I haven't heard enough of it. If it was a pre-existing argument or just something that broke out there, and you get pride.
They haven't
the best
said
of
nothing.
You. And I think that's part of the thing. And welcome to the No Name Podcast. Not sure what episode we're on, but
this is episode 82.
82.
Yeah.
But when you get into that, it goes into our chapter 12 because chapter 12 is all about. I mean, chapter 12 leads in because of violence.
Yeah.
You have King Harold who's trying to regain his momentum because again, you've had Jesus come in, died, but really it's not so much that Jesus came in and died. I mean, that's important for us for our sins and stuff. But at this time and point, it's the growth of this ministry, the growth of this belief, what they previously called the way and stuff like that. You see it spreading so much. And so now
there's a resistance against this. Yeah.
And then there's the resistance. You have Paul who's trying to take it down. You have all these other things. And we read about Paul's conversion. But now you have Harold stepping in and you see that in verse 2, I think it tells a lot. It says, then he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to seize Peter also. That was during the days of unleavened bread. And you see that his motivation for violence is to regain the confidence of the people.
Yeah, political reasons.
Publicity.
He has this motivation to go.
Yeah.
Well, he has this motivation to
yeah.
go get it because he's trying to get the rule back.
Yeah,
that's why the Jews are questioning him.
Yeah, that's why he arrested Paul.
That's what
Peter.
I mean. Publicity.
Yeah, he arrested Peter because he's like, oh, okay. He said, okay, because before they cut off. Who was it? John? Or was it James? Yeah. They
out James.
They killed him. He saw that was good, and he was like, "Oh, okay, well, yeah, well, let me just get this other guy."
Well,
he's like, "Let me get this other guy."
If you take a look at it from Harold's point, like the church is growing.
Yeah.
What he thought was good, again, killing Jesus. Killing Jesus. The whole point of killing Jesus was to please the Jews. Or the Pharisees, not the Jews.
Jews, right? Because he had a good relationship with the Jews.
Not every Jew, but with the Pharisees. I mean, with the synagogue and the congregation of that time. That's the leadership of that time. That's who he was pleasing, because they didn't see no fault in him. And so when they kill him and they see that's going to please them, but instead now it's coming up uproar. And what Herod doesn't want, he doesn't want the Roman Empire. Yeah. No, he doesn't want the Roman Empire to come and step in.
Yeah.
Because if they see that he cannot take control of the domain that he's been given, the Roman Empire is going to come in. Mm-hmm. Right? He's under the Roman Empire. Whatever Caesar says he has to do.
Yeah.
But in those times, because they're so big, the communication wasn't as fast and stuff. Okay. Rome wasn't going to step in unless they saw it going to hell. Mm-hmm. And when you see the Jews are chasing this new religion and trying to kill them, and you hear these random deaths and stuff, but the religion still is growing and it's creating because you got to imagine, right? When we see Jesus, and just taking a step back, when you see Jesus in the Gospels, mm-hmm. Jesus is only disrupting one part of a region. He's mostly in Jerusalem. He's mostly in Nazareth. He's mostly in, I can't remember what the name of it starts with a C. Caliphus or something like that. I can't remember the name of the city. But he's mostly in that little region there, and that's where he's causing all the uproar, right? Jerusalem being the center heart of it. But the moment the church spread, it's causing uproar in all these other areas now. And they're spreading, right? So now you have the Jewish synagogues, and though you have people converting, you also have people who are upset about the conversion. So you're seeing these uproars in different cities, and what Harold's trying to do is calm it all down, because the last thing he wants is Rome coming in and overstepping him, because now he looks incompetent.
So that was probably the reason why he wanted to wait, and when he imprisoned Peter, it's probably the reason why he wanted to wait until after, because it wasn't like some kind of festival like leavened bread or something like that going on. So he didn't want to really cause a real uproar. So did he wait until afterwards? He was going to wait and then bring him out and kill him, or
I don't know. The
Bible, I know the Bible don't say it.
It doesn't say. I think more of he wanted to make a big display of it. Like, it doesn't say how he killed James. It just says they killed him by the sword.
Well, I think by the sword, that's like you getting beheaded. Like, what isn't that what it meant? Like when you get,
I guess so. I don't know if he killed him by the when it says with the sword. I don't know if
I think I read that somewhere.
Okay, well maybe that's what it is. Yeah. I don't know. When I read it, I think of it more of, they were looking for them and someone just killed them. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a full out festival and full out out display.
Right. It says then he killed them. Then he killed James.
We seized him.
Yeah, but I think when they say he, I still think it's more of his men, his people. I doubt the king himself went down.
Yeah, because it says, and he had James, the brother of John, put to death with a sword. It don't say that he specifically killed him.
Well, in another version, in my version, it says, then he killed James, the brother of John.
Right.
Okay.
With the sword. That's what I'm saying. So there's two. So as you get into the different translations, that one goes a little bit more into it. So I don't think Harold directly killed them, because Harold wouldn't have put him. I don't think for the kings of that time weren't really the type to go in and be killing them. They were more standing to, I mean, kind of like what you would see in I don't know, what is it, Gladiator and stuff. They more ordered the executions. They didn't really go out there and do it. And I think he takes Peter and he holds him, right? He holds him because I think he wants to make a big display of it, right? So Peter's been doing all these miracles. Peter's the one that's most outspoken.
Yeah.
Peter's going and doing these things. And so I think when he gets Peter, he thinks, okay, here, you know, not that Peter was similar to Jesus, but Peter was the figurehead of this movement at this point.
Right.
He was a bigger name.
And so he I think he wanted to make display of it. When you go to 5, it says, Peter was therefore kept in prison, but constantly prayer was offered to God for him by the church. Sorry, where was it? 6, I think it is. And when Herod was about to bring him out that night, Peter was sleeping, bound with 2 chains between 2 soldiers, and the guards before the door were keeping the prison. Now you see that Peter's heavily guarded here. Why? Because they don't want him to escape. Like, he's gotten out of prison before, I believe. There's hearing of these miracles. They're hearing of these different things. Like, they're doing whatever they can to make sure Peter doesn't escape. So they literally have him chained to 2 guys. And then they have 2 guards constantly always outside.
That's crazy.
To make sure nothing happens.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the things as I'm reading through this, because what you find is Peter the angel comes and frees him.
Yeah.
And sometimes the thing, and again, we're not always going to read every single part or go into every detail of it, but I think one of the concepts, when I read this, and if I think of myself, if I was a brand new Christian and I'm reading through it, I would ask myself something like, why did God allow Peter to go free, but James died?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, like.
And James, wasn't he like one of the first apostles to die?
I think so. I think
Right?
he would have been one of the first, yeah. And you kind of think about why God allowed those things, and we don't always have a clear answer. Like, there's not, we can make our assumptions and our theories, but God had a purpose for it. For whatever reason, that was the way God allowed it to happen. Like, at this point, it apparently wasn't Peter's timing to go.
Yeah.
God still had things for him. For whatever reason, it was James' time to go. And that's always a tough pill to swallow, especially in Christianity, because we want it all to work out perfectly for us. But what working out perfectly for us means for us versus what it means for God is a very different thing.
Yeah, because God is righteous and he's going to make right choices.
I just think sometimes, like, to me, when you study this, and that's why I think we always go back to this piece of the relationship with God cannot be contingent on what he gives you.
Right.
In regards to circumstances and stuff. One of the things you have to come to is that God loved us no matter what. Like, you come to that understanding of God's unconditional love and his caring for us, that he gave us salvation before we deserved it. He gave us all these things. But he's not always going to pull us out of it. And I think a lot of times when people preach on the scriptures, they preach on this, they focus on the Peter being free from the prison. And they talk about the church praying together and how the angel came and saved Peter and took him out. And I believe in communal prayer. I believe we should pray for each other. I believe we should be in accordance with God's will and have each other in prayer. But the answer to our prayer is not always going to be an angel coming and taking you out of prison.
Right.
Sometime, unfortunately, it's going to be the first part of this chapter where James dies.
Yeah.
You know
what I thought was kind of interesting? Peter, like, the angel had to wake him up. Like, he knew that he was going to be killed in the morning or whatever time. You know, he was in prison and he knew that he was going to die.
Yeah.
But, you know, look at this. Like, the angel had to wake him up.
Yeah.
So I think he was like, all right, well, if it's my time to go, Lord, then.
I think when you have when you have a relationship with God, you're always going to trust God that he's going to do his will, not what we want. You see, that's why every time I pray for somebody that's, near death, in their deathbed, and when the families call me, I never promise a miracle because I don't know what God's going to do. All I promise is God's going to do his will. If it's time for him to take him or her, you know, then it's gonna be time. And if not, God's gonna, heal the person.
Yeah.
You see, because that's where sometimes we make mistakes when we promise, oh no, God's gonna raise them up from the bed and this and that, and we don't know God's will.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, man. Like I think that Peter,
and that's why Peter was comfortable.
Yeah, right. I just think he was
because
he was really in a state.
He was trusting in God's will.
Exactly.
It's time. It's time, and if it's not,
right.
I'll keep on serving Him.
You know what I mean? Like he was just like, all right, like whatever happened.
It's like the Apostle Paul.
When
he was near death too, he was ready.
Same thing, yeah.
And then when Paul said, you know what, I've learned how to live when I have, and I learned how to live when I don't have, because that relationship with God makes you trust that God's gonna do His will.
Yeah.
When we don't have that relation with God, we always want to blame God for everything that goes wrong.
Yeah.
And here the church was praying for Peter. You see, they were praying. By the time probably when James died, nobody really knew that James was locked up or anything. It looks like they just killed him.
Killed him, yeah.
He wasn't in prison or anything like Peter. And
well, the word had spread because the Jews were pleased by it.
Right.
So the word had got
right.
out.
So it got out. Once Peter was in jail, in prison, they started praying for him because they already knew that James got killed.
Yeah.
And that's but that was the church. But like I said, Peter's relationship with God, was something, because he was asleep when the angel came.
I know he was sleeping.
Sleeping
and then look, and then they guided him out of the city. He woke him up and guided him out, and then to get to these people, and like, how did he know to go to these people's house? Like, how did he know that to go to these people's house? He's like, I'm gonna go to these people's house. And then when he get there, the lady, what was her name?
Rhonda. She was a child, yeah.
Yeah, she was. I think she was just so overjoyed because she didn't even let him in the door.
Yeah,
like she ran back to tell everybody. You know what I mean? Like she was,
and that kind of goes and tells you, like, there's, like, to me, one, I'm assuming they must have been gathering here because they're there at Mary's house, the mother of John, whose surname is Mark. So that's John Mark, who would end up writing the book of Mark, who ends up traveling with Paul and them for a while. So he's introduced here. I have a feeling they had been gathering there. Peter knew this. So he shows up, and Rhonda hears his voice, runs off. But even when she tells them, they don't believe her.
Believe it, yeah.
Yeah, they're
somebody's an angel or something.
But here's I think the more, to me, interesting part is they rather, like, and you knew there was a spiritual side because they were seeing the miracles and things going on at that time, which I believe there was a little bit more spiritual component back then because Jesus had just passed away. I feel like the apostles had a certain touch that at that time God was still using, right, to kind of show the way Peter healed people, and you see these things, and I think they were more willing to believe that it was his spirit or an angel than they were to believe that he was actually standing out there. Because I think that's what it says, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are beside yourself, yet yet she kept insisting that it was so. So they said it is his angel. So they thought it was his spirit, his angel. They thought maybe he had already died, or he might have died, but they thought it was more of his spirit that she was hearing, not so much that he was standing out there.
Yeah.
And Peter keeps knocking. So again, that's one of the things, like, I like that in the beginning it talks about how the group how the church was praying for Peter. But again, they were praying, but we don't know what they were praying for. Were they praying that God just protect them, God be there? Because they didn't believe when he came out, right? And so I take away from this, not that they didn't have belief, but sometimes it's hard to believe in what God's going to do or how he's going to do it. But that's not what's important. It's more of having that relationship with God and trusting in him, because God heard their prayers. He knew they were praying, but
he
answered them.
Yeah, but it's like today. We come together, people come to church and all that, and they'll sing the songs and, praise God, listen to the preachers and all that. but yet they can't trust in God, you know, because they're trying to depend their relationship on what's going on in the church. Instead of them having a relationship with God, a personal relationship with God, you know, to understand, you know, because, you know, like here, there were some of them that didn't believe that was Peter, you know.
I think the majority of them.
Yeah, the majority, you know. But yet they were praying,
Yeah.
you know, and sometimes we can pray, and if we don't trust God, you know, and the only way you can trust God is by having a relationship with Him, you know. That's how your faith increases.
But I think that's where the important distinction of the communal prayer and coming together. Sometimes we think the communal prayer comes and changes God's mind. And I don't know if it changes God's mind. Like, God has a plan. He has things that He's going to decide on. But sometimes, like the communal prayer is more about coming together and praying and having that encouragement together. But it's not to come, like, I think sometimes the thought is, if I come together with the whole church, God's going to take this cancer away from me, or God's going to take this sickness away from me.
Yeah, it don't
or
work
God's
like
going to take this thing away from me.
No, it don't work
but sometimes that communal prayer is just about coming together, and God may not take it away from you, but He's going to give you peace as you're going through it. Or He's going to give you these different things. And I think that's sometimes the confusion there, right? They were coming together, I think, to me, they were coming together for two things. They were praying for Peter, but they were also coming together to comfort each other and encourage each other, because that it had to be scary that if they could take one of the main leaders of the ministry and imprison them,
they're coming for you
what's
too.
so more of them, right? So they're coming together, encouraging each other, praying, seeking God, which is what they should have been doing. And I believe they were praying for Peter's deliverance, but they probably were also praying, like, Lord, if you're gonna let him go this way, like, let it be for your honor and glory, and then let it be quickly, or whatever the case may be, right? They probably prayed for a lot of different things, and I think sometimes that's what we've lost in the modern day church communal prayer. We come together and we pray, and we think that it's to change God's mind, but sometimes it's about coming together and just having that comfort of being together and praying and seeking God's peace.
The problem too, that when we come to church, most of us, we always come to church to ask for something from God, you know, because we have a need, instead of coming just to come and thank Him, you know, and come just to worship Him, you know, and no matter what's going in our life, He's in control of all the situation. You know, most of us, we come and, you know, it's just to come and ask for something. And when God doesn't do it because we ask Him and we ask more people to pray about it and all that, you know, then we get discouraged. But because we're not, that's why I tell people, sometimes God is not to blame for the things that happen in our lives. Sometimes it's our fault. We get away from His relationship with Him.
Definitely.
And once you get away from His relationship with Him, you're going to depend on your own knowledge instead of God's knowledge.
Take you so far.
And you know what's...
And that's why, like here, Peter, that's why I believe Peter could sleep, because he understood that God was in control.
And you know, something just hit me, and I was thinking about it because I was going to read the part of the scripture that he said before we moved on to the next piece. But remember, we sometimes forget to piece everything together, but remember what Jesus told Peter. Remember, Peter asked about John and how John's going to die. And he says, don't worry about him. He says, and he tells him, one day you're going to be led away to a place you don't want to be. And you're going to be killed that way. He was telling Peter how he was going to die. So Peter may be thinking, okay, I'm being led away.
This is it. So
he was comfortable because God already had told him where he was. Peter, probably after he had to get over the shock and everything and stuff he had to go through, and this is a more mature Peter at this point.
Definitely more mature.
He knows that this is where, but he knows when it's his time, because Jesus told him clearly, like, you're going to die like a death you don't want to die. And I say that because if you read verse 11, now it brings more context to it. And it says, and when Peter had come to himself, so he's gotten out, he finally realizes he's safe. He said, now I know for certain that the Lord has sent His angel and has delivered me from the hand of Herod and from all the expectations of the Jewish people. So in other words, he knew for certain that he wasn't going to die here at the hands of Herod. Even as he's walking, he's still thinking it's a dream. Because in his thoughts, I think he's going back to his thinking, okay, Jesus told me, like, someone's going to guide me by my hand. Well, I've been guided into prison. I'm headed to my death. Like, this is my death.
Yeah.
But it wasn't his time yet. And so God freed him from that. But that's one of the things, like, sometimes we don't think about, like, Peter had this weird, some people could call it opportunity, some could foresight, some may have called it a curse. But Peter had this thing that Jesus told him how he was going to die.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because that's when Peter erupts and says, well, what about him, right? Because he got uncomfortable when Jesus is talking about his death. He's like, well, what about him? And that's when Jesus told him, what is it to you about him?
Right.
If I let him live forever,
that's
you know, and I think that's one of the things for us is, like, we get caught up in the unknown a lot, you know. And even if we know the known or whatever, like, a lot of times God will put things in our heart and the Holy Spirit will start confirming some of it. And we want to change God's mind instead of accepting of what it is. Sometimes things are going to go in our life and God, you can feel the Holy Spirit telling you, like, you're going to have to go through this. I'm not going to change it. I'm not going to get you out of it. But then we'll come and we'll ask for 30 different people. Well, let's pray together. Maybe that'll change God's mind. Maybe this or that.
It's kind of like what he said. Like, you know, he said you go, you pray for people, and you just say, hey, you know what? Let whatever God's will be done. Let it be done.
You know, it's like even the disciples. When Jesus told them to follow him, and he told them, you follow me, you will be hated by men.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, he was preparing them for what's going to come. And today, in Christianity, we teach that, oh, no, everybody's going to love you because we're Christians. We're going to be love of, you know, and we're going to be holding hands, singing Kumbaya and all that. And, you know, and one of the problems, you know, is that most Christians don't want to become students of the Word. The Word will teach you. The Word will guide you, you know. And sometimes it's going to tell you things that might make you uncomfortable in serving God, you know, and we don't like to hear that. All we want to hear is how God's going to bless us, how God's going to prosper us, how, you know, now that we're Christians, everything's going to be all right, you know, and all that. And it is all right because when you know that God is in control, you'll be in peace whichever way it's going to go, good or bad.
Sure.
You know, because not life is life is perfect. So, you know, we're gonna go through a lot of the negative, but God is always in control when we trust Him.
I think as we move on, we see God's hand moving through this. Peter's been set free, goes there, but now you see God's intervention a second time, which I find interesting. Like Herod has been angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon. And they came to him with one accord, and having made Blastus the king's personal aide their friend, they asked for peace. Right, all this is going on, and this is what I find interesting. So this is the same Herod that killed James, but it's the moment in 21 when it says, "And so on a said day, Herod arrayed in royal apparel sat on the throne and gave an oration to them, and the people kept shouting, 'The voice of a God and not a man.' And then immediately an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give glory to God, and he was eaten by worms and died. But the word of God grew and multiplied." Now, this is a very strange portion to put in here. Like, it gets thrown in, and it sometimes is weird. Like, I think of it, maybe I think of it differently than people. And I go through my thought process. At first, I think, okay, Lord, when he killed James, you didn't step in and kill him. Like, you let him have it. Then you let him capture Peter.
Yeah.
He's probably been killing more Christians along the way. But it's the moment that the people start calling him a God that you step in. And the only thing I can come to, and this is my opinion, so I take it with what grain of salt you want to take it with. But I think prior to all of this, when there's God always has hope for humanity, each individual. No matter the horrific stuff we've done, there's always that hope. But the moment you allow yourself to be proclaimed a God, there is no longer a possibility that you're willing to bend your knee to the true God.
Yeah.
And at that point, it's done. Like
puffed up.
And for him, it wasn't just that the people were shouting that he was a God. I think he had truly believed, I am a God. Like, I'm touching all these godly people who were supposedly of the way, and God's done nothing to me.
Well, look at Nebuchadnezzar. He built a statue because he wanted to be a god.
Yeah.
And what did God do to him? Turn him into an animal for 7 years. Send them out there, to.
But why but that brings up a good point. So the question would be, why did God send Nebuchadnezzar to the wilderness, but then kills Harold for the same offense?
Well, hold on. Let me just chime in. So when I read it, immediately the first word that came to my mind, and again, this is just like you, my opinion, was pride. I just thought about pride, and immediately I thought about Satan, and how, like, okay, God did the same thing to Satan. He cast him down.
Yeah.
So then with this guy, like, oh, you want to be proud? I'm gonna cast you down. You know what I mean?
I think
that's what I thought of. That was my first thought.
When Nebuchadnezzar came back to his senses, I think he glorified God. And Herod, I think God saw that this man ain't gonna change.
That's what I mean. Exactly. And that's one of the things I think we struggle. I mean, you hit where I was going. I think this is to me, we jump over this because this is hard to explain sometimes, I think, in Christianity. But I think there's a piece here that we sometimes miss, is that we're trying to explain something from God's view, but we're not God.
Right.
And so to your point, sometimes God makes decisions because he sees the heart where we cannot. Ooh. And so, like, to your point, with Nebuchadnezzar, God can see his heart. Like, we just go based off of what the scriptures have told us, what history tells us, and things like that. But God sees Nebuchadnezzar's heart, and sometimes he understands, like, hey, this man can be changed. Mm-hmm. And then he looks at Harold's heart and he says, this man's not going to be changed, and he can get worse. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's why it's hard sometimes to, when you come to a surrenderance of God and you're allowing God to be God, you have to come to that surrenderance that he's going to know things that you're never going to know.
You know that, I don't know if you guys ever read the autobiography of Jim Bakker. And
nope. But I feel like I have.
And I'll let you know. And when Jim Bakker was writing that book, you see, way before, when his ministry, what was it called? Praise the Lord ministry. I have no idea. He had a big old, like Disneyland and all that, and hotels, and I mean, the guy was one of the first mega churches and one of the first TV, and he was very popular. And he and his autobiography said, look, a lot of people that didn't know us. Everything we try to do every time we plan something, it was to give God glory. Mm-hmm. So, but during the process of planning and everything coming to fruition, it would change from Jesus to Tammy and Jimmy. And right before everything went South. To hell for him, David Wilkerson had gone and talked to him and told him, Jim Bakker, why don't you sit down? Why don't you restore your life? Get back to where you were with God. And he said, how can I leave all this? And David Wilkerson started telling him what was going to happen, right? And Jim Bakker said, after everything that went down, I went to prison and all that. When I was in prison, I asked God one thing. I know we did wrong. I know I sinned. I said, but why is it that my ministry or your ministry was wiped out of the earth? Said, I mean, everything was destroyed. Said, when other ministries have done the same thing, but you allow them to restore with somebody else and all that. Why? And he said, because the poison that was there wasn't going to go away. So it had to be destroyed.
Okay.
And Bakker said, you know what? I did not come to realize how far I was from God until I came to prison. He said, So you see, sometimes when things are not going to change, God has to intervene and do something.
Mm-hmm.
We might not like it, but God has to do it.
I think that's one of the toughest parts is stepping back and not trying to be God. And I think, and it's always a thin line in trying to understand this concept. And that's why I think people struggle when they try to explain it and things. I think here you have to understand, like, God knew something in Harold's heart that he had to make a decision. We may not know it, we may not see it, and we may not completely get it. The same way with Nebuchadnezzar and others. And I think that's one of the things I was re-listening to the book from C.S. Lewis. And it's one of the things sometimes, as you get older and mature in Christianity, you come to understand, like, before when you're younger, you're quick to see something, whether it's like a celebrity or someone that gets saved or something, and they do something, and you're like, oh, they're not a Christian. They're not a Christian. It's easy for us to say they're not a Christian, or they're not this or that, or even with just other people. And the problem is we don't know the heart. We don't know if they actually did give their life to Christ. They're just going through their journey and struggling. And so I think that's one of the things sometimes we have to stand back and look at. I was saying that because C.S. Lewis was talking about in the book of talking. There's a difference when people self-proclaim, like when people say, "Yeah, no, I backslid," or "No, I'm not a Christian right now," or this. But it's something different if someone's telling you, "I'm a Christian." It's hard to go to their face and say, "You're a blatant liar," right? Yeah. They may just not be a good Christian right now. In other words, they may not be following all the stuff, and that's the hard part with Christianity, because we may all have different thoughts of what a Christian should look like, how a Christian should act. But at the end of the day, the foundational Christianity is accepting Christ into your life. But there's a transformation that happens over time and stuff. And so that's why I think sometimes we have to take a step back and say, hey, we got to trust God's opinion on things and trust that he's leaning and he's looking and he's going to decide, right? Even if we see someone and we may not have proof that, oh, they're not a Christian. It's not our job to prove if they're a Christian or not. It's you leave it in God's hand and you keep moving forward. And so
it's like, a lot of people come and ask me about different churches, different pastors and all that, right? And I tell them, you know what? That's not my job.
Yep.
They have to give an account to God one day. Yep. My job is I got to give an account for our ministry, how we're leading our ministry. How, when we stand before the Lord, I said, you know what, I think I don't have the time to say, oh, this ministry that's wrong or this ministry, fault. No, that's not my job. Between them and God, and it's right. It's hard to tell who, if a person tells you he's a Christian, you have to trust that he's a Christian.
You gotta go by their word. I mean, they may not be a good Christian. I mean,
because then they turn around and say we're not good Christians.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I mean.
So
like, I think sometimes we take the fruits of people, because some of us, we're all gonna have bad fruits at times. Yeah. Unless we're perfect, then God will just take us. We're gonna have bad fruits at times. I mean, it's easy that when we have a bad fruit, to say, oh, that person's not a Christian.
Yeah.
But it's totally different to say they're just not being a good Christian right now. Maybe God's dealing with them. You have no idea where they're at in their journey with that issue or that vice or whatever it is that they have in their life. In closing with this, that's kind of the thing here, and you're going to see it grow. So it closes with Barnabas and Paul, and they're setting out in their ministry, and they're taking John Mark with them. So that's Mark, who would later on write the book of Mark and would write Acts. They're taking him with him, and the reason I say this is because you're gonna see Paul has to deal with the same thing later on in life. In this first journey, and we'll see it in Acts. I don't want to get too far ahead, but in this first journey, you're gonna see John Mark doesn't live up to Paul's expectations and is ready to go home. And Paul writes him off. And that leads to when they're going on their second ministry, Paul's like, I don't want this guy going with us. And he writes him off. But later on in life,
look at what happened.
They reconnect.
They reconnect.
And again, it's because Paul was judging them from the outside and not looking at the inside because he was a young man that was being transformed and still changed. So I think that's one of the things is like, I think in this chapter, you see God's hand move in different ways. You see his hand not move when it comes to James' death. You see his hand move in saving Peter, and then you see his hand move and taking
Killing
down
Herod.
King Herod.
Yep.
And so sometimes God's hand's going to move the way we think it should, and sometimes it's going to move a different way. It's not that it's not moving; it's just not the way we want it, and you have to go through that journey.
This is close it and say you got to remember, man, God is righteous.
Yeah.
And God is always going to make right choices. That's just the bottom line.
Yep. So make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Ask questions. Keep digging deeper. If you want some books, we've been talking about books and stuff. There's different books. I recommend checking out C.S. Lewis' Mere Christianity. Might be a little bit of a difficult read, but it's definitely worth taking a look at and reading. We'll be going into Acts chapter 13 next week. So again, hopefully you've been keeping up the journey with us, and hit that like and subscribe button.
Deuces.